committee recognizes that the current readiness crisis affects all of our military services. It is part of a larger, deeper trend of forcing military units at the tactical level to try to do too much with too little. In the last 3 years, fatal training accidents have taken the lives of 4 times more service members than our enemies have in combat. This cannot continue. Unfortunately, this is an issue of command. There's plenty of blame to go around for the deteriorated state of our military, and we cannot ignore Congress's responsibility. Years of budget cuts, continuing resolutions, and sequestration have forced our military to maintain a high operational tempo with limited resources. We know that has come at the cost of training, maintenance, readiness, effectiveness, and the lives of too many brave young Americans. Our service chiefs, including the Chief of Naval Operations, have testified repeatedly that the Budget Control Act and sequestration are endangering the lives of our men and women in uniform. My dear friends, we were warned. To fix this problem, we must all do better. Military leaders must make honest assessments of their requirements and request the full extent of what they need. In turn, we in Congress must provide these resources in a timely and predictable way. That is the only way to truly restore the readiness of our force. It is the only solution to ensuring that accidents like this do not happen again. And it is the bare minimum we owe to the brave men and women who risk their lives to defend our nation. Senator Reid.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to join Senator McCain in welcoming Secretary Spencer and Admiral Richardson and Mr. Pendleton to the committee this morning to testify on the issues surrounding the recent accidents and the Department's plans for determining what went wrong and what steps need to be taken to ensure such accidents do not occur in the future. Service in the nation's armed forces can be very dangerous. The country is saddened whenever we lose one of America's sons or daughters, but it is particularly disturbing when young people are casualties in the course of conducting normal peacetime operations. I want to extend my condolences to the families of those who lost. I know I join all my colleagues and Chairman McCain in expressing our profound sympathy for your loss. We should not prejudge the outcome of the Internal Navy reviews of the circumstances around these accidents. However, we do know that the Department of the Navy has been facing serious readiness problems caused by deferred maintenance, reduced steaming and flying hours, and canceled training and deployments. In addition, the Navy, like other services, has also been operating at a very high tempo for a prolonged period. These conditions have been aggravated by many years of budget constraints and uncertainty, which have forced leaders into making difficult decisions. All these factors have inevitably taken a toll on Navy commanders and Navy operations. Secretary Spencer and Admiral Richardson, I ask your commitment that you are giving this situation your full attention, that you will follow these investigations wherever they lead, and that you will share all findings with Congress. We must do all that is necessary to provide and sustain our Navy and all our armed forces. Again, I thank the witnesses, and I look forward to the testimony. Thank you.
Secretary Spencer.
Chairman McCain, Ranking Member Reid, distinguished members of this committee, I want to thank you for the opportunity to appear before you and talk about the state of our Navy. Before we move forward, though, I want to express our deepest condolences to the families and loved ones and the crews who have lost one of their own in the last few months. Having looked into the eyes of many of these families and shared time with them, knowing that their returned ones return home in a flag-draped casket, I know my words are completely insufficient. To the families present, please know that Polly and I have you in our thoughts and prayers. The 17 sailors from the USS Fitzgerald and John S. McCain were sons, brothers, husbands, fiancés, uncles, and friends. They were patriots, and they will not be forgotten. We pledge our full support to their families and crews. We're going to back our words with actions. We have a problem in the Navy, and we're going to fix it. In addition to the investigations already initiated, we are conducting 2 thorough reviews. The CNO's comprehensive review will take a look at the tactical and operational situation at hand. My strategic readiness review will be an independent team comprised of military and industry experts that will look and examine root causes, accountability, long-term systemic issues, and then provide remedial insight. These reviews will complement and enhance each other, providing the depth and criticality that the situation demands. After I've received and reviewed the recommendations from our teams, I will act to the limits of my authority to change processes and acquire any needed capabilities in order to protect our people. I'm here today to impress our sense of urgency and to highlight a way forward to renew a culture of safety and training across the fleet. We will take lessons learned from the recent tragic events and come out the other side a stronger, more capable Navy Marine Corps team. Make no mistake, we are not waiting 60 days or 90 days to make adjustments. The CNO will address a list of actions the 7th Fleet is taking immediately to address the situation at hand, ranging from ship-to-ship materiel inspections to the activation of AIS radar identifications while we're trafficking specific areas. We are not lying idle, and I can tell you, ladies and gentlemen, we are committed. I appreciate the opportunity to work with you on the remedial solutions and to find our way forward. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Admiral Richardson.
Chairman McCain, Ranking Member Reed, and distinguished members of the committee, I also want to thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss the recent U.S. Navy incidents at sea. To begin with, I also want to express my deep condolences to the families of the 17 sailors who served their country with honor and distinction and lost their lives in USS Fitzgerald and USS John S. McCain. In both of these tragic incidents, our sailors acted heroically to save their ships as they combated flooding and the loss of critical systems. Care and support to these families, the families of our sailors, is our top priority. I've committed to them that we will learn everything we can from these tragic events to prevent another accident. As you pointed out, sir, many of the family members are here today, and we will always stand with you. What we do is inherently dangerous, but it is leadership responsibility to ensure we provide the right training and oversight to keep our team safe and effective. We are taking immediate corrective actions to ensure we meet the training and material readiness standard to prevent another mishap. We are not stopping with immediate actions. In addition to the investigations into the specific incidents on Fitzgerald and McCain, we're conducting, as the Secretary pointed out, a comprehensive review which will turn over every stone to examine for more systemic problems. And this review will complement the Secretary's strategic review. I've testified several times about the triple whammy, the corrosive confluence of high operational tempo, inadequate budgets, and budget uncertainty. The funding approved in fiscal year 17 is being used to plug our most urgent readiness holes in the fleet, and our 18 requests sustains that progress. While we have prioritized maintenance and readiness dollars, full recovery will not happen overnight. It will take years with stable and adequate resources. But make no mistake, sir, while these factors do exert a negative force on the challenges we face, at the core, this issue is about leadership, especially command. Our first dollar, our first molecule of effort, our first team must go to safety. Safety is first. And no matter what the situation, those charged with command must achieve and maintain a standard that ensures their teams are trained and ready to safely and effectively conduct assigned operations. We must remain vigilant to meeting this standard, fighting against every pressure to erode it. Our commanders must meet the absolute standard to develop safe and effective teams. If we cannot meet the standard, we do not deploy until we do. And we must establish a command climate that supports honest reporting. Senator, these incidents demand our full attention. We must provide our sailors the necessary resources and training to execute their assigned missions. I am accountable for the safe and effective operations of our Navy, and we will fix this. I own this problem. I'm confident that our Navy will identify the root causes and correct them, and that we'll be better in the end. Again, thank you for the opportunity to be here, and I look forward to your questions.
Mr. Pendleton.
Chairman McCain, Ranking Member Reed, members of the committee, thank you for having me here today to summarize GAO's work on Navy readiness. Mr. Chairman, I don't know what caused the tragic recent accidents, but I do know from my work that the Navy is caught between an unrelenting operational demand and a limited supply of ships. At this point, I'm skeptical that the Navy will be able to make significant readiness gains unless the demands on them are decreased. Even with increased funding going forward, my assessment agrees with the Navy that it will take several years to rebuild training, manning, and maintenance, foundations of readiness that have become shaky over time. Our work has also revealed significant management issues that the Navy must confront. In a 2015 report, we found that the ships based in Japan had such aggressive deployment schedules that they did not have dedicated training periods like ships in the United States did. In fact, we were told that the overseas-based ships were so busy that they had to train on the margins. When I asked what that meant, it was explained to me that it meant that they had to squeeze in training when they could. The assumption, I think, was that the 7th Fleet, because it was perpetually in motion, it was ready. I think the Navy has now realized that this conventional wisdom was in fact likely faulty. We recommended at the time back in 2015 that the Navy revise deployment schedules to create dedicated training time and also more broadly assess the risk associated with increased reliance on overseas basing of ships. DoD and the Navy agreed with us, at least on paper, but they've taken little action since to implement our recommendations. The Navy has other, even more broad management challenges that it must address, like ship manning. A Navy internal study found that sailors were often working over 100 hours a week back in 2014, and it concluded this was unsustainable and potentially contributing to a poor safety culture. We recommended, in brief, that the Navy assess how much work it actually takes to run a ship and use that to size the crew. Maintenance is also taking longer and costing more. Ship deployments have often been extended. This causes ships to have more problems when they're brought in for maintenance. Shipyards have struggled to keep pace for a number of reasons. Over the past few years, the lost operational days that have been created by the maintenance overruns have cost the Navy the equivalent of the presence of almost 3 surface ships per year. That in turn strains the remaining fleet, and it's an unsustainable, vicious cycle. As you know, the Navy is not alone in its readiness challenges. That's why GAO recommended, and this committee has supported, thank you, the need for the development of a department-wide readiness rebuilding plan that explicitly balances resources with demands and is transparent about how long it will take to rebuild readiness and what it will cost. I suggest you continue to insist that the department provide you that plan. Over the past 3 years, GAO has made 14 recommendations in all to the Department of Defense to help guide the Navy and the services toward improved readiness. And as the Navy and DoD develop a roadmap going forward, I sincerely hope they consider our recommendations to help guide them. Mr. Chairman, thank you for having me here today, and I'm happy to take any questions you have.
Well, thank you, Mr. Pendleton. I appreciate it, your testimony, but more importantly, I thank you for the important work that you do, which is incredibly important to this committee. Secretary Spencer and Admiral Richardson, surface force readiness has degraded over the last 10 years. Surface chain of command has become complicated on the waterfront. There's a blurring of lines of authority and accountability. The growing backlog of off-ship repair requirements, a large deep maintenance requirement that has not been adequately identified or resourced. The effort to derive efficiencies has overtaken our culture of effectiveness. The materiel condition of the surface force is well below acceptable levels to support reliable, sustained operations at sea and preserve ships to their full service life expectancy. Ships home ported overseas have limited training and maintenance, which results in difficulty keeping crews trained and ships maintained. Some ships home ported overseas have had consistently deferred maintenance, resulting in long-term degraded materiel condition. Without a sustainable operational schedule and comprehensive risk assessment for ships home ported overseas, it will be difficult for the Navy to identify and mitigate risks. I could go on. Mr. Secretary, do you agree that these statements ring true today?
I do, Senator.
And I agree with you. Unfortunately, these are findings from the Navy and GAO reports from 2010 to 2015. Many of the issues we're discussing today have been known to Navy leaders for years. How do we explain that, Admiral?
Senator, there is no explanation to reconcile those two observations. While clearly there is much more to be done, and these observations point to those, and I commend the work of Mr. Pendleton and the GAO as well to providing such sound recommendations. There has been also an effort to address those observations. We've not been sitting idle. And so whilst clearly it's been insufficient to close the readiness and effectiveness gap, we have been making steady investments to respond to the indications that we've got in training, in manpower, and in maintenance. And we'll remain committed to closing that gap as well and reconciling the difference between supply and demand.
Well, I can't continue this much further without asking your assessment of the effect of sequestration on your ability to address these conditions that I cited, which come from GAO and the Navy itself. What effect does sequestration, for example, we're now facing this same collision coming up with as of 1 October. What effect does sequestration have in affecting these recommendations and situations as described by the GAO and the Navy itself? Mr. Secretary?
Senator, the impact of sequestration and continuing resolutions is deleterious. It's an impact on the Navy that is stunning. Having been asked to come and run a business, i.e. the Navy, as CEO of the Navy on the man, equip, train, and supply side of the equation, it's very disturbing. Just looking today to give you a feel, Senator, with the CR that's coming up starting October 1 going through December 8th, the fleet will mitigate approximately $200 million of O&M shortfall over the next 69 days.
That's operation and maintenance.
That is correct. I'm sorry.
Okay, go ahead.
It's a tentative number. It's still in work, but that's where we think it's coming from. The fleet will minimize the impact by incrementally funding or shortening periods of contracts where possible. This will cause a degradation in the quality of work. The fleet will also delay consumables and phased replacement material purchasing for ships. And this will impact, again, the quality and service and the operation of the ships. We have to do management of the funds resources we have. This is not solely a funds issue, but you asked about CR and the effects of sequestration. We are living them. They are untenable.
Admiral?
Sir, if I could add to that, the effects of sequestration and continuing resolutions makes everything harder, everything. And as we face the continuing resolution before us now, in addition to what the Secretary said, we will be considering deferring or slipping 11 more ship maintenance availabilities. There are dozens of new projects that we won't be able to get started on. These are things that would start to address some of these conditions that we've got. Over the past 9 years now, looking over as we review the data, the number of efficiency studies, effectiveness studies, can you do more with less? They all result in a constant pressure to, it rarely results in an increase. Having said that, sir, I maintain that this is an issue of command, and that if you only give us one ship, it's our obligation to operate that ship safely and effectively. And so I do not, while that makes it harder, that is not in no way an excuse for the performance that led to these 4 incidents.
Mr. Pendleton, do you have anything?
Yeah, I mean, we heard about the impact of budget everywhere when we do our work. It's hard to pin it down exactly. There's examples in our reports of depot maintenance being deferred and furloughs and postponed deployments and ship fuel problems. I think it's a cumulative disruption at this point. I think what we judged back last year was we are where we are. And the Department, not just the Navy, needs a plan for going forward, in part to be able to articulate what's real and reasonable going forward, sir.
Thank you. I'm very proud of the vote of confidence in the Senate approval of the Defense Authorization Act, which is overwhelming and a source of pride to me that all 27 members of this committee agreed on the legislation that was just approved overwhelmingly. I have to point out there was an effort by an amendment by Senator Cotton to try to rectify this sequestration issue to some degree, and I will not name individuals, but it was blocked from even being considered for a vote. That, to me, is, well, it's disgraceful. Senator Reed.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral Richardson, you continue to come back, and I think appropriately, to the issue of command, even though we all understand the physical and procedural and resource constraints that Navy has faced. But the issue of command is played out, and not theoretically, but very practically. That's when a commander says, I can't do this because my ship is not ready. Have you, in your capacity, indicated to COCOMs that you can't provide ships because not ready? Has commanders of individual ships said, I can't, to the fleet, I can't move because my ship is not ready?
Sir, as I've testified before, and you know very well, we don't meet more than 50% of the combatant commander's demands as it is, just from a force structure standpoint and a combination of that and readiness. And there have been times where I've spoken with my subordinate commanders where there is just insufficient time to get a force trained and certified to meet a deployment date, and we have to go back to the combatant commander and say, you're going to have to wait.
And with respect to the issue of command, when those tough calls are made by the commander, that does not result in any kind of either formal or informal disparagement of the commander. That's
Senator, if I could go down and give that commander a handshake and a medal, I would do that. This is exactly the type of honesty and transparency that we need to run a Navy that's safe and effective.
And so in the process going forward, not only will you be attempting, I think, to analyze the issues, come up with resources, but also continue to stress the idea of commanders having the ultimate responsibility to determine the worthiness of their ship.
That'll be the absolute center of gravity of our efforts there.
Mr. Pendleton and his colleagues have done some excellent work, and they point out that the certifications of a significant number of ships, particularly in the Pacific, are not adequate. Can you tell us what that certification means? Is that a good indication of the capability of the ship, or is that not?
This is an indication that we use, sir. This is our indication, and so it's either a good indication or it's a meaningless indication. I'd like to think that those certifications mean something, and while Mr. Pendleton's report gets to some ratios, and I'll leave it to him to get to that math, I agree with his conclusion that over the last 2 years, the number of certifications on our ships, particularly in the forward deployed naval force in Japan, has dropped precipitously, and that deserves our full attention. Should have been brought to our attention more urgently before now.
With respect to deployed forces, there seems to be a distinction between deployed forces and stateside forces in terms of lots of things, repairs, refitting, resources, training. That is going to be a focus, I presume, of you and the Secretary's inquiries about why the disparity?
It certainly will be a focus of the comprehensive review to take a look at the way we generate and certify readiness, compare it to the forces in the United States, the rotational forces that leave, deploy, and come back, versus those forward deployed forces that remain at a higher state of readiness in theater.
And Admiral Richardson, over the last several years, the Navy, and not the Navy alone, but all the military services have attempted to, quote unquote, streamline training, make it more effective because of deployment schedules, because of the availability of personnel. Do you think that in any way contributed to these accidents, that these young people were, hustled through, if you will, and not without the same kind of opportunities that predecessors might have had to learn their jobs?
Sir, I'll tell you that it's too early to say if these had a specific impact on those incidents. Those investigations are still in progress, but we are looking specifically at that. What is the climate with respect to the priority of training and certification, and does it always get given lower priority to operations and the need to go out and execute the mission? And then, as Mr. Pendleton and the Secretary have hinted, that when maintenance periods run long, that further pressurizes our operational time. And so training gets, is there a pattern that we consistently box out training, particularly the training on the fundamentals? That's absolutely a focus of the investigations.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I chair the Readiness Subcommittee, and on February 8th, we had a readiness hearing. Admiral Moran was at that hearing, and now keep in mind that was February the 8th, and of the 4 incidents we're talking about, all except the one on January 31st were since that hearing that we had. And Secretary Spencer at the readiness hearing, in fact, I look at your situation. You've now been in the job for, 5 weeks, 6 weeks? I bet you wonder sometimes what you've gotten into, but it's a tough situation, and you're the kind of person that can try something new. And but at this hearing, Moran testified that the Navy could only meet about 40% of its demand from the regional combatant commanders. We've heard the reaffirmation of that, which has been going on for a long time. We also heard the Navy is the smallest it's been in 99 years, and went on to say, it's become clear to me that the Navy's overall readiness has reached its lowest level in many years. That is all due to the inconsistent and insufficient funding that does not match the demand for Navy forces due to global threat situations. So we hear over and over again that the Navy is taking on more and with less. So Secretary Spencer and Admiral Richardson, if the Navy is focused on ensuring the foreign deployed ships are ready, and recent history is our example, what shape would the rest of the fleet be in terms of readiness? What shape is the non-forward deployed in? How would you characterize that? Admiral Richardson.
Sir, it has been our consistent priority to resource those forces that are forward deployed and that are going to deploy. Mm-hmm. And that the surge forces, we call them,
passed yesterday, and assuming that we're able to keep these things in there, recognizing we have a conference to go, we have appropriations and all that, I'd like to have you look at these 14 things. Look at the problems that we're trying to address in this particular hearing, and give us your evaluation as to how any of these 14 things might resolve the problem in a long term and a short term. All right?
We'll be happy to do that and provide it for the record.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here today. Cybersecurity, as we all know, is a growing concern as we become more reliant on electronic means for communication, for storage of data, for operation of day-to-day systems, and also for navigation and control systems. And I understand that cyber experts from the 10th Fleet were sent out to Singapore to investigate electronic data on board the USS John McCain to see if any cyber intrusions had taken place, and that Admiral Moran stated last week that future accident investigations will include cyber investigations to ensure that there's been no tampering. Can you tell me, I guess this is for you, Admiral Richardson, what are we doing proactively to ensure the security of our navigation systems and our electronic systems?
Senator, just as you said, we did send an investigation team out to the John S. McCain to take a look at that. I got a report, an update on that just this morning, and still no evidence of any kind of intrusion or tampering yet. We're continuing to investigate. And we've, in the Navy, have been on a steady path to continue to harden ourselves against, we'll really be prepared for operations and combat in the cyber domain. And that starts first and foremost, like everything, with people and organizations. And so we've been steadily bringing in and training cyber experts into our team. We stood up that 10th Fleet as a response to that. We have technical authority at SPAWAR out in San Diego. And we've got a information warfare type commander, just like all the other services down in Hampton Roads, Virginia. And so we believe that we're organized properly. Those organizations are becoming manned. Their structures are, those billets are being filled. The training is being done. And then we are doing a combination of things. Many of these measures require physical standards so that our systems are hardened against intrusion. We are certainly baking those into new systems that we are bringing on board. And then we are looking at hardening those legacy systems that we already own to the greatest degree possible. A very fast-moving problem, a very dynamic problem,